Let's start with a specific moment. Aboard a cargo ship named the GFS Galaxy, an Indian engineer was simply doing his job when an Iranian cruise missile struck the vessel. He was a civilian, thousands of miles from home, and he was killed instantly. He wasn't a soldier deployed to a combat zone. He was a technical worker, keeping global trade moving. The sheer violence of a military-grade weapon, obliterating a non-combatant doing routine maintenance, is a jarring reality of modern conflict. There is a dark psychological truth to how we process this kind of loss, famously observed by Joseph Stalin. He noted that a single death is a tragedy because we can easily imagine the victim's grieving parents or shattered family. But 1,000,000 deaths? That becomes a statistic. Our brains simply cannot comprehend grief on that scale. We are seeing that statistical blur happen right now in the Middle East. If you count the military and civilian casualties across Israel, Iran, and neighboring states since this specific conflict erupted, the death toll has reached nearly 8,000. That is 8,000 distinct individual families torn apart. In Lebanon alone, intense bombing campaigns have left roughly 4,000 people dead. Entire neighborhoods have been leveled, and an unknown number of people remain missing beneath the debris. It is remarkably easy to read those numbers on a screen and scroll past. But if we want to understand the true gravity of this escalating war, we have to force ourselves to look past the top-line data and remember that every single digit represents a human being who didn't make it home. What makes the engineer's death uniquely frustrating is that India has absolutely zero direct involvement in this regional war. The Indian government hasn't deployed troops, picked a side, or interfered in the geopolitics of the Middle East conflict. This map illustrates how India's strict neutrality contrasts with its actual casualties on the ground. Across the Red Sea and Gulf region, a total of 8 Indian seafarers have now been killed, caught directly in the crossfire between U.S. and Iranian military actions. We have a situation where a nation entirely at peace is bleeding because of the military decisions made by foreign governments thousands of miles away. The physical safety of Indian citizens is now directly tied to the diplomatic resolution of a war they have nothing to do with. Finding a way to stop the missiles is no longer a distant humanitarian concern. It is an urgent national priority. While global trade is often discussed as a series of digital transfers, the trillion-dollar reality is physical. It depends entirely on massive cargo ships carrying the world's resources across the ocean. This chart shows the top seafarer supplying nations. Most skilled maritime labor comes from a concentrated pool: the Philippines, China, and India. If workers from these specific nations decide the risk is too high and stay home, global trade physically halts. Every anti-ship missile fired at a commercial vessel is an attack on the seafaring workforce of the Philippines, China, and India. Killing these sailors is a tragedy on an individual level. Geopolitically, it is a calculated threat to the human supply chain that holds the entire global economy together. The risk to India goes beyond its citizens at sea. We also have to look at physical infrastructure, specifically the massive investments India has made in the Chabahar Port in Iran. India developed specific terminals here to bypass Pakistan and secure a direct, reliable trade route into Central Asia and Russia. It is a critical node in New Delhi's long-term economic strategy. The U.S. has recently conducted intense bombings near Chabahar. There is complete uncertainty about how close strikes are getting to Indian-developed terminals. As retaliatory strikes intensify, the safety radius shrinks. India's multi-billion-dollar investments sit dangerously close to ground zero, fully exposed. Whether it is the seafarers maintaining the ships or the ports receiving them, India's carefully constructed economic footprint in the Middle East is being dismantled by a cycle of violence it cannot control. We are well over 100 days into this conflict, and there is no credible sign of de-escalation. The lack of a cohesive endgame draws a sharp parallel to the U.S. invasion of Iraq, where massive destruction was justified by claims of weapons of mass destruction that never actually materialized. The traditional international playbooks are failing. The United States cannot realistically step in as an impartial mediator while it is actively dropping bombs and conducting military operations in the very region it claims to be pacifying. At the same time, the Israeli leadership has zero incentive to accept peace terms brokered by Russia or China, given the deeply strained diplomatic relations between them. The usual geopolitical heavyweights are effectively paralyzed. This leaves a massive diplomatic vacuum. The traditional system is completely deadlocked, and as long as no one can force a negotiation, Indian lives and the global economy remain right in the line of fire. But there is one major player uniquely positioned to step into that vacuum. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly cited India's backing to legitimize his diplomatic stance, especially when communicating with U.S. political figures like Donald Trump. India occupies a rare diplomatic position, maintaining high-level access to the leadership in Israel, Iran, and the United States simultaneously. This network provides a specific path toward negotiating strike assurances that nations currently sidelined, or those directly involved in the bombing, simply cannot reach. India can no longer afford to be a passive observer. The cost of neutrality is already being measured in dead sailors and threatened infrastructure. It is time for New Delhi to use the trust it has built across the globe to stop a war that continues to claim Indian lives as collateral damage.